Oh yeah, exciting stuff.
Find out.
I have talked before, but it's been quite a while. Went up to Sudbury beginning of November, I think it was, yeah. And gave the talk up there.
Microphone.
I can't hear you.
Microphone. Microphone, please. Make sure you turn it on this time.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
You better not stand in front of the speaker.
What?
You better not stand.
Actually, it's fine. Not to disparage you, but you're a good sound insulator.
So, anyway, after going up to Sudbury, they seemed to think it was a good talk. And then Pete said that I should give it down here because he'd never seen it. He's still not going to have ever seen it. But, eventually. So this is basically sort of how I became an amateur astronomer, or as I like to say, how to make a not bad astrophotographer in only 52 years. So this would be my first scope. There's actually two parts to it. There's this and the large refrigerator box that separated me from the ground. This would have been it when I was grade 5, thereabouts, which would be about the beginning of the 52-year journey. This would be my second scope. This was very cool. It's a terrible telescope, but it was my first real telescope. And I could see Jupiter, and I could see the moons of Jupiter, and I could see rings of Saturn, and the Orion Nebula, and that sort of thing. It was a Christmas present from my parents, and Christmas Day showed up, and I got up. I was excited to see what I got. I asked for a telescope more or less incessantly for about 6 months. And I get up and I go to the Christmas tree and there's nothing there. And I'm like, I was so disappointed. And everybody's pulling out their presents and I pull out a present here and there was some socks and stuff like that. No telescope. And then my mom says, look on the tree. And there was an envelope on the tree with my name on it. I pull it, open it up, and it's a cutout from the Eaton's catalog. They had ordered the thing, it just hadn't arrived in time for Christmas. Best Christmas ever. Now, I used this for a couple of years. I did all sorts of things. I used twine on the legs to stabilize it, and all kinds of stuff. I was actually sawing up old cameras and attaching them to the eyepiece end, to like sawing off the lens on the camera, the old Kodak cheap cameras. And then I was also always going to the local library and taking everything they had on astronomy and reading it and taking it back. You got more. Eventually the librarian got really tired of trying to source books for me because I burned through her collection of most of the cities around Chilliwack at that time. So she introduced me to an older gentleman who was an amateur astronomer in Chilliwack, and he had this. And it was maybe 5 years after we got introduced, I used to go up to his observatory and he showed me everything. That's a 12.5-inch Cassegrain, a classical Cassegrain. The really long thin tube is the 3-inch Jaeger's refractor that he used for a sighting scope. And then there was the 5-inch scope that was the accessory scope, which is what I still have. And he built the whole works. So that's a clock drive with counterweights to regulate the speed and everything. Built it all from scratch. He was a machinist. Well, he ended up having to go to a nursing home because he was quite old. And when I was probably in about grade 9, and he called, well, we used to go visit him at the nursing home. My dad would take us up there, and we'd visit for a while, and he'd sold his house, and he had this scope in storage. None of his kids wanted it, and this one time we go out there, I'm pretty sure my dad had conspired with him already, but he said, you know, I figured out what to do with the scope. And I said, oh, cool, what's that? He says, I'm giving it to you. Rick hits the floor. So this was just before summer. So my dad was a construction teacher. We spent the entire summer in the wood shop at his school building a new observatory for this thing. And this went in there. Now, I did eventually sell the scope when I finished high school. I tried to give it to the local school, but the school board nixed the deal because they were worried about liability. So I sold it. I actually sold it to a guy from Calgary who drove down in his old Thunderbird, and then we took the whole thing apart, observatory and everything, and he loaded it onto a flatbed truck to take it back to Calgary. One of these days I might go cruising Calgary and see if I can find the thing, see if I can get him to sell it back to me. Even just the 3-inch refractor. With the 3-inch sighting scope, you could see Encke's division in Saturn's rings. It was absolutely the most crystal clear view of anything you could see. And with the Cassegrain, a lot of my friends would say, why are you always up there in the middle of the night looking through this scope? And I would drag it, say, well, you know, come and I will show you. And I would show them Saturn, because in this thing, if you look here, this is the eyepiece. It had a 7-inch focal, and that was to get it down to sort of reasonable power. But you point that thing at Saturn, and it just hung there in space. It was gorgeous. And if you looked at, say, the Hercules cluster, M13, it looked like somebody had dropped a bucket load of diamonds on some black velvet. It was just spectacular. And everything's hand-built. The setting circles, the clock drive, the whole works. And you had to pour oil into this thing. It was like definitely 40s stuff.
Awesome.
One of the things I did was I used that scope, and I charted the position of Titan orbiting Saturn using my admittedly highly evolved artistic skills. In fact, yes, it was my grade 10 art teacher who said, I'll pass you, never take art again.
Sounds like my music teacher.
And they pronounced it fart.
Yes. But this, plus a lot more stuff, got me the trophy for the Earth Science, because we didn't have an astronomy science award for the BC Science Fair. So that was, I got a write-up in the local paper. But it's not the local paper, that's the Vancouver province. You know, one of the main papers is BC. And I defy you to figure out which one's me. The really good looking one, you know.
One with glasses.
Yep, that would be right.
The second one from the left.
So, when I sold the telescope, I had talked to Mr. Baxter, who had given it to me, and I said, I'm going to have to sell the telescope. I'm going to use the money to go to university and take a degree in astronomy. He said, sell the telescope. So this is me in 4th year, and we talked our astronomy prof, who was also the head of the department, that he should blow a fair chunk of his research budget on taking everybody in the department that wanted to go see the solar eclipse in Winnipeg, well, not in Winnipeg, but in Manitoba in 79. And so we loaded up the 2 departmental Suburbans with all the equipment we could stuff in there, plus all the people we could stuff in there, and off we went, and everybody had to have an experiment. Mine was to measure the temperature of the solar corona, and this little doodad here is a Fabry-Perot Interferometer, which I built. There's a machine shop in the astronomy department, and basically put this thing together. The cool thing is, you know, the gravity wave experiments and the where they've got the two long arms and everything. Those things are just really, really big Fabry-Perot interferometers. So I've built one of those. Didn't detect any gravity waves. Didn't actually measure the temperature of the solar corona either. That was a bit of a bust, but this was back in the days when you didn't have digital photography. Focusing was a bit of an issue. This was the results. There could have been fringes in there, instead of a big white blob. But if there'd been fringes, everything would have been really good, and then that's determined the temperature. Now, while we were there was lots of picture taking going on. This is one. Not bad for, hopefully it's focused, we'll find out in 30 days. Yeah. See, this is far better than anything Andrew's done. I've even got a diamond ring.
So is that your best solo pictures? Solar eclipse pictures?
Oh, that's
Yes, no, actually, this one is.
Whip him and roll him and smoke.
Now, this one, I know you're looking at it, it's actually pretty darn good. And I took this with a Kodak Curelet-Balan camera, which is a big bellows camera. The thing folds out. And the way I took this is basically I set up my main experiment and then decided, about 4 feet away, I kicked a hole in the snow, put a pair of blue jeans in there, put the camera on the blue jeans, and roughly aligned it to be pointing up at the sky, and took this picture.
We're just happy you took the lens cap off.
So, fortunately, this one, it's pretty hard not to, because if it's closed, it's got the lens cap on. If it's open, the lens cap's off. But you can see stars, all kinds of stuff. It quite possibly is.
Where were you in Manitoba, Rick?
I was on Hecla Island. So it was as far east as you could go where there was power, which got us to the longest eclipse length, and I think it was a little over 4 minutes. And it was interesting because I was going there with a bunch of people from BC. Now, I was from BC, but I'm also born and raised in Saskatchewan, and I know cold, and I had some experience driving in snow, and these people did not. So, the two Suburbans tootling down the highways, and I'm going, for God's sake, whatever you do, don't touch the brakes. Do not touch the brakes. But we managed to get everybody there and back in one piece. And it was very good. I mean, when we got there, we stayed at this resort on Hecla Island. It's normally sort of in the summertime, it's a sort of beach resort, and in the wintertime, it's cross-country skiing. And when we got there, the day we got there, a full busload of people from California showed up. And they were all like from California. They'd never been anywhere but California. They showed up to this thing, they stepped off the bus, and it was like -24. And that was
And they're in shorts.
before we switched to Celsius. So it was really cold. And these guys were like, oh my God. And that was like at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so it was nice and warm, right? And about half of them tried to get back on the bus. At any rate, they did a lot of fairly stupid things. We kept trying to convince them not to do. Like, they set up all their equipment the night before and then tented them in plastic. Or not the night before, the day before. So they set it up and they put plastic tents of polyethylene over them. I'm going, don't do that. Don't do that. So the next day they get up ready for the eclipse, and they're in there testing their cameras, which are inside the tent, which has been all the shutters are frozen. They're going, what do we do? Get your butt, take that camera, get inside, blow dry the heck out of it, and then bring it out. So most of them managed to get pictures.
Wait, what is that stuff in the phone?
Reflections. It's a Kodak Tourister 2. I think it was, might have been modern in the Oh, this is what happens after you've had a successful observation of the eclipse. Basically what happened, we were in the sauna, and I was telling everybody, you know, the Swedes, and the Norwegians, and when it's cold out, they'll sit in the sauna and then they'll go throw themselves in the snowbank, and nobody believed me. I said, I'll prove it. So I ran outside, threw myself in the snowbank, and they locked the door.
Not all of them were inside.
As you can tell, I was in better shape. And here's some of the pictures from around. Everybody take the pictures. That's me up in the top here. I'm actually standing up. I am not kneeling. There was a lot of snow.
The other people behind there standing?
Yeah. Yeah, they were on a bit of an ice shelf, but this was just like this. Yeah. And this would be my very first astrophoto. It's not bad. It's done on glass plates, Tri-X glass plates, with a 12-inch Cassegrain sitting on the top of the astronomer. And this was an experiment that we had to do for a lab, and it was go out and get a picture of 2 astronomical objects. So we all went up there, the entire class, all 4 of us. This was in 4th year. And started to, what should we take a picture of? And we decided that it was going to be M42 in the Ring Nebula. So M42, that one's easy. They could dial that in with the setting circles. Everybody had to do it on their own, you know. So we got the picture of M42. Everybody had to take their own picture. But then the next one was the Ring Nebula. And I was the only one who was sort of an observational astronomer. Everybody else was theoretical. They did a lot of equations and that sort of thing. So they were looking up in the star charts. So it's in this constellation called Lyra, and it's here, you know, and all that sort of thing. And then this was back in the days before electronics, so you had setting circles, and you had to calculate what the RA should be and all that stuff. And they couldn't find it. And about 40 minutes in, and I said, for God's sakes, it's right there. And they're going, what do you mean right there? I said, it's right there. He says, unlock the axes on this thing. And I took the telescope and I grabbed it and I went, okay, lock them up. It's right about there. And looked in the eyepiece and it was dead center. Never happened again. But
Were they impressed?
they were impressed. Although the picture of M57, I don't have it. It wasn't good, but it was good enough to record it. So then I kind of moved on. This is when I got my Commodore 64. I know. It started out with a VIC-20, and basically I'd always wanted to see what did the sky look like from another star. So I wrote a program on the VIC-20 that would calculate where, you know, if you said, I want to move to the star 30 light years that way, what does the sky look like? And it would calculate it. And this was on a VIC-20, so basically you'd say, because it was very fancy, you could actually click on the star, display the map, and click on the star and say, move there. And then you could go for a walk, take supper, and then you'd come back, and it would be starting to draw the first star. Now, they eventually came out with the PCXT with turbo mode, where it would go to, I think it was 4 megahertz.
4.88.
Yeah. That one, it was amazing. You could really do stuff with that, and that was when I decided I needed star charts, but I didn't want to pay $300 for the paper ones. And there was one company that sold electronic star charts that would run on a PC, but it was like $600, and I wasn't going to pay that either. So I said, screw that, I'm going to write my own. So I did. It ended up being, I think, the 2nd or 3rd electronic star charts available, and I didn't sell it for $800. I sold it for $50, and fair number of people downloaded it, and I got a fair chunk of beer money out of it. But in order to do it, you had to get stuff. Things like a star catalog or a deep sky object catalog. Well, they all came from the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, and you could get those, but they shipped them on 9-track tape. And you had to pay the shipping. It was free as long as you sent the tape back. So I had to figure out a way to get it from 9-track tape onto a VAX VMS system, which I then had a PC hooked up to that I could dump the data onto the PC, and I ended up writing this thing where it was, by that time I had I think it was a 386, and it had a 40 megabyte hard drive. The operating system took up 680 kilobytes or something like that, and the program and data took 39 megabytes. But it worked, and I can still see features in the newer programs that I wrote originally, the way it's displayed and stuff like that, so it's kind of cool. Now the other thing I did was shortly after, I guess it wasn't that shortly after, well after I started working at Triumph, which is a giant particle accelerator out at UBC, they started the program of astronauts from Canada, so I applied. Actually made it into about, it was about the last 2,500, it was something like 25,000 people applied, 2,500, they got to the 2,500 cut, which means you're nowhere near getting an interview or anything like that, but it was kind of cool. I like to say that if it hadn't been for Mark Darnell, I might have made it, but he took my spot. And I know when I got married, and my wife and she's saying, well, you know, we're going to do this. I said, yep. I said, there's only one thing. She said, what's that? I said, well, if NASA calls and they want me on the space station, I'll be back in about 3 weeks. Other than that, we're good. She figured there was a fairly low probability of that happening, so.
How old would you be at that time frame?
1992, so that would be 34.
Yeah.
Well, I figured I could troubleshoot stuff, and did a lot of physics. So this was where I worked at Triumph. This is the main control room, so we actually ran the cyclotron from there, tuned beam lines and did all that stuff. Very cool job.
Check behind the Enterprise too.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I had a hand in the assembly of that. I was one of the builders of it. This is the original console with a few updates. Some of the monitors are fairly modern for the time, but it was basically switches, knobs, and buttons. And one of the jobs they had me doing was moving computers around, because when I first arrived there in 1980, I'd come from a job working in a potash mine, and I was not in the IT department. I was in the, here's a shovel, there's the potash department. So I was quite strong, and these things were like PDP-11s, and you know, both sides
Mini
of it.
frames.
And so if they needed one moved around, it was like, get the cart or see if Rick's available. So they've modernized things quite a bit there. This picture is the same place from about 6 years ago.
Enterprise is still there.
Yes, it is. It's still there. A few more monitors. This isn't even, I mean, this is fairly cool. There's there's at least two control rooms there now, because they have multiple beam lines, and one's called the heavy ion system. And I went there, and it's got this control room where you've got glass overlooking stuff, but then they've got a line of monitors, and there's like 18 monitors, and they're big monitors. And you can take a mouse and star to the leftmost one, and it goes right over the rightmost one. It's really cool. I don't know how they do that. And this would be the interior of the cyclotron. Amongst other jobs besides operating cyclotrons, I would every once in a while have to go inside this thing and do maintenance on it whenever there was a maintenance period. Normally, it's closed, so the top is right down close to the bottom, and it's sealed vacuum tank and the whole works. Each one of these things, these things here, there's 40 of them on the bottom, 40 of them on the top, and at the time, this would have been 1989 or so, they'd be worth $250,000 each. And they're bolted down at this end because they vibrate, they're radio antennas. And you don't want to bolt them down, so they can basically vibrate to get stuff going. And so you pretty well have to be certified as able to walk across these things and not break them. Short interlude, that's a darn good fish.
Yeah, nice fish.
32-pound spring salmon.
Rick's 10 feet behind the fish.
I've actually got a picture, another picture with my daughter standing there. She was about 6 years old, and the fish and her are about the same size. Took us about a year to eat that thing. All along, basically, I never stopped doing astronomy for this whole time. This was in Victoria, our second house. Our first house I didn't have an observatory. The second one, I told my wife, I really want to have an observatory. She said, fine. It better not look like an observatory. So this, when closed up, looks like an ordinary garden shed. But the roof rolls down and then flips vertical. You can fold down one peak of the roof so that you can get a little more sky there. And it fits in nicely with the garden. And then here's where the astrophotography really begins. This was with the Canon TX, and this is Comet Hale-Bopp. And this was my first photo of the Andromeda Galaxy. So this was with a LX6, a Meade 8-inch f6.3 Schmidt-Cassegrain. It was a 45-minute photo where it was manual guiding, as in staring through the sighting scope and pushing the little buttons to hopefully keep the star centered on the illuminated crosshairs, and 45 minutes long. It turned out not too bad, I think.
Is that on film?
That's on film.
Film, yeah, that's right.
Now, you can see this nice little streak here. That's a meteor that went through. I was guiding on, I think it was this star, when it streaked through the field. Had to switch eyeballs. It was very bright. Now this is my first digital camera, which is, it was a Philips SPC 900 webcam, where it took it apart, committed horrible surgery on the CCD chip in it, and it's actually the third version because the first two didn't survive the surgery. And it's Peltier cooled with a Canon camera lens mount on it and everything, and took some pretty decent pictures. So these are all pictures taken with that camera. The only mosaic is the moon right here. That's not it. So right here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 12 frames. And that's using the 50mm lens. I didn't have it stuck to a telescope or anything. So even the North American Nebula that is just a 50mm lens. As you can see, it's quite well focused, although some of the stars, when they get brighter, they get a little square. And a much better shot of the Andromeda Galaxy. Now this would be my first real sort of digital camera, which was a Pentax K1000. I think that's what it was. And it actually did very well on astrophotos. The only thing it had problems with was the noise. So then I eventually moved on to Canon cameras and started getting stuff like this. This one is, I think the first one I did with my full frame 5D Mark II. This is the one where I ran out to Kilkers on the day I bought it, more or less. Got out there, set everything up, realized I'd forgotten the guide scope. So I figured I aligned it as good as I could to the North Star, and then basically figured out I can do a 1-minute shot without getting significant star trailing. So this is a 2-hour shot of the Andromeda Galaxy, one minute shot at a time, which also told me what the battery life on my camera's battery is. You can get 2 hours out of a single battery charge. And we're getting better. This is the Witchhead Nebula from Namibia. I kind of cheated. I went to the darkest place on the planet.
Wow.
And another shot from the darkest place on the planet. The really cool thing about everything here, that's 47 Tucana. So that's a globular cluster. It looks like I mean, that's about how bright it looks to the naked eye. It's not like M13. You can find it, it's hard. And that's the brightest one pretty well in the northern hemisphere. This one, you'd have to be half blind and not wearing your glasses. And then the Large Magellanic Cloud, you can actually see the blob that is the tarantula with the you don't have to use the telescope. This is the first picture I took with the H alpha filter. And I remember going down to KW telescope and saying, "Okay, I'm going to spend if this thing doesn't work, can I bring it back?" And Brian said, "Yes, you can bring it back." I took it out and I set it up, and it was kind of a hazy night, but I figured, well, let's give it a shot. And I got this, which ended up being on the banner out there. But went back to KW telescope and he says, "How'd the filter work out?" I said, "Brian, my cold dead hands." They cut through everything.
Do you remember what camera you were using?
This one was a Rebel XT.
Is that the one I got?
That's the one you got, so you can take pictures like that.
Is it modified?
Can I have a filter, please?
No. Is it modified? Yes, I modified the Rebel XT myself. If I were you and you have something like a real DSLR you want to modify or something, send it to somebody else. We're too old for that sort of impact to our life expectancy. Light-weighted bullets. There's like tiny little things in there. You can't touch them with your fingers, but you'll wreck them. You have to use a toothpick to move them around. It's nasty stuff. And this is getting better. So this is with the 5D Mark II, and I'm starting to pick up the dust around the Pleiades, not just the Pleiades. Because the background does not look even, and that's because it's not even. And then this was this is one of the first shots with the 5-inch refractor after being modified, fiddled, diddled, and slightly more expensive than it was originally. It's got a ridiculously wide field of view now. And the Rosette Nebula, I like this one. And to be continued. eventually, I'm gonna try and get nearly as good as he is. That's all, folks.
Thank you, Rick. Any questions for Rick?
Thank you, Rick.
I have one question.
No,
You said you were, what, 6 years old?
I have been sick.
Once.
Once. That was-
No, like when you were first got into
Yeah.
astronomy.
Well,
right?
it
What was
maybe-
the catalyst? Do you remember?
Oh, I know exactly what it was.
What was that?
My first scope to the planisphere. My dad was a teacher, and he had bookshelves full of stuff, and I used to go through it. There was books on everything. I've still got some of them that I managed to convince him to give me. But one of the things I found when I was wandering through his bookshelf was that planisphere. And I thought, what's this? Fiddled around with it, took it out, and tried it out in the backyard, and I could figure out where the constellations was. And it wasn't too long after that Chilliwack had possibly the worst ice storm in its history. Like, there was like 3 inches of ice on everything. So all the power lines were down. The entire city was blacked out for 5 days. And so suddenly it went from a town, and it wasn't a big town, 8,000 people. Went from a town of 8,000 people with a fair amount of light pollution, but not too bad, to a town of 8,000 people with no light pollution at all. So my mom would have to drag me inside. You've got to get inside and warm up for a bit. No, I always wanted to be outside. I had a pair of binoculars by then, and it was pretty cool.
Thanks for sharing.